In the year 341 BCE, a child was born on the island of Samos who would create a philosophy so threatening to power, so dangerous to established religion, so radical in its implications that his opponents spent 2,000 years trying to destroy it. Epicurus, known to history as the philosopher of pleasure, did something extraordinary. He took the chaos of the Hellenistic world, the anxiety of people living through constant war and political upheaval, and forged a system so complete, so liberating, so focused on human happiness that it terrified every authority that came after him. But here's what makes Epicurus truly revolutionary. He wasn't just talking about pleasure in the way his critics claimed. He asked questions that still haunt philosophy today. What if happiness doesn't require wealth or power or fame? What if the gods don't care about us? What if death is literally nothing to fear? What if the good life is simpler, more accessible, more natural than anyone imagined? Most philosophers before him tried to make ethics complicated, requiring years of education, aristocratic birth, or divine favor. Epicurus did something different. He showed that happiness is natural, that it's available to everyone: slaves, women, foreigners, the poor, that all you need is understanding, friendship, and freedom from false beliefs. He revealed that most of what we fear is illusion, that most of what we chase is unnecessary, and that the simple life, properly understood, is the richest life possible. If you're finding value in this exploration, I'd truly appreciate a like or a subscribe. It makes a real difference in helping this channel grow. I'm always curious about where you're tuning in from, so leave a comment with your city and what time it is right now. It's amazing to see our community spanning the globe, all connected through these philosophical journeys. Now, get settled, maybe dim those lights, put on some gentle background sound, and let's dive into tonight's exploration together. We're going to discover why Epicurus's philosophy was considered so dangerous that it had to be destroyed. Part 1. The Garden Revolution: Why Pleasure Became Dangerous. Let me start with the scandal that made Epicurus's philosophy genuinely revolutionary, and it begins with a sign so simple it sounds stupid. Stranger, here you will do well to tarry. Here our highest good is pleasure. Around 307 or 306 BCE, Epicurus bought a house with a garden outside Athens and put up this sign. That single word, pleasure, changed everything. Every philosopher before Epicurus, from Plato to Aristotle to the religious authorities, had placed something else at the center of ethics: duty, virtue, honor, piety, wisdom, excellence. All abstract, all difficult, all requiring special training or special birth or special favor from the gods. Epicurus said, "You've all missed the most important thing, the thing every creature seeks naturally, the thing that needs no justification, the thing you can verify through your own experience right now: pleasure." Here's what he meant, and this requires careful attention. When Epicurus said, "Pleasure is the highest good," he wasn't advocating drunken orgies or endless feasting or hedonistic excess. In fact, Epicurus himself lived on bread and water, with occasionally a bit of cheese as a special treat. He was known for his frugality, his simple meals, his modest dwelling. His critics then and now have deliberately misunderstood him, created a caricature called Epicureanism that has nothing to do with what he actually taught. So what did he actually mean? Epicurus made a distinction that most people miss, and it's the key to understanding everything else. There are two kinds of pleasures: Active pleasures, what he called kinetic pleasures, are the pleasures of satisfying a desire. The pleasure of eating when you're hungry, drinking when you're thirsty, warming up when you're cold. These are real. These feel good, but they're temporary, and they depend on having a lack that needs filling. Then there are static pleasures, what he called katastematic pleasures, and these are something entirely different. These are the pleasures of equilibrium, of not being in pain, of not being disturbed. When you're not hungry, not thirsty, not cold, not anxious, not afraid, you're in a state of pleasure. This is what Epicurus called ataraxia, usually translated as tranquility or imperturbability. And here's the radical claim that turned philosophy upside down. Epicurus argued that these static pleasures, these states of equilibrium, are actually superior to active pleasures. Once you've achieved ataraxia, once you're free from pain and disturbance, you cannot increase your pleasure. You can only vary it. The pleasure of a simple meal when you're hungry is fundamentally no different from the pleasure of an extravagant banquet. Both satisfy hunger. Both remove pain. Both return you to equilibrium. Think about what this means. It means the good life doesn't scale with acquisition. More isn't better. Richer food isn't more pleasurable once you're no longer hungry. A mansion isn't more pleasurable than a simple shelter once you're safe and comfortable. Luxury goods aren't more pleasurable than basic necessities once your needs are met. This completely inverts the logic of power and wealth. If happiness doesn't require luxury, then the wealthy have no advantage over the poor. If tranquility is the highest pleasure, then the anxious king is worse off than the contented peasant. If simple needs are easily satisfied, then freedom from desire is more valuable than the ability to satisfy endless desires. Now here's where it becomes explosive for power structures. Epicurus opened his garden to everyone. Men and women studied together, scandalous in Athens. Slaves and free people sat as equals, unthinkable in Greek society. Foreigners and Greeks, educated and uneducated, all were welcome. The only requirement was commitment to the philosophy and to the community. This was radically egalitarian. Aristotle had argued that only aristocratic Greek men with wealth, leisure, and education could achieve the good life. Plato had divided society into classes, with philosophers ruling. The religious authorities said you needed proper piety and ritual to please the gods. Epicurus said, no. Happiness is democratic. It's natural. It's available to anyone who understands the truth about pleasure, pain, death, and the gods. But here's what made the authorities truly nervous. Epicurus didn't just offer an alternative path to happiness. He offered an alternative to their entire system of control. Consider how power works. The wealthy say, you need money to be happy, so work for us. The powerful say you need protection and order, so obey us. The priests say you need to please the gods, so follow our rituals and pay our fees. But if Epicurus is right, if happiness requires only bread, water, friendship, and understanding, then you don't need the wealthy, the powerful, or the priests. You can opt out of the entire system. You can live simply in your garden with friends, pursue philosophy, achieve tranquility, and be happier than kings. This is why they had to destroy him. Not because his philosophy was false or obviously flawed. His opponents couldn't refute it through argument alone. But because if people believed him, the entire social order would collapse. Who would fight wars for glory if glory doesn't bring happiness? Who would accumulate wealth for luxury if luxury doesn't increase pleasure? Who would compete for political power if power brings disturbance rather than tranquility? Who would fear the gods if the gods don't care about human behavior? Epicurus was offering liberation, not through revolution, not through political reform, but through understanding. Understand the nature of pleasure. Understand what you truly need. Understand that death is nothing, and the gods are irrelevant, and you're free. Free from fear, free from endless desire, free from dependence on things outside your control. Let me make this concrete with what Epicurus taught about desires. He divided them into 3 categories, and this is where his practical wisdom shines through. First, natural and necessary desires. Food, water, shelter, safety, friendship. These must be satisfied, but they're easily satisfied. A loaf of bread, a cup of water, a simple roof, trustworthy companions. These are available to almost everyone. Satisfy them, and you have the foundation for happiness. Second, natural but unnecessary desires. Fine food, sexual pleasure, luxurious surroundings, aesthetic beauty. These are grounded in nature. They're not artificial, but you can live well without them. They can enhance life if pursued wisely, but the moment you depend on them, the moment you need them, they become sources of disturbance. The problem isn't the pleasure itself. It's the attachment, the craving, the suffering when you can't have them. Third, neither natural nor necessary desires. Fame, political power, excessive wealth, domination over others, winning competitions. These are completely artificial, created by society, sustained by opinion and comparison. And here's the crucial insight. These desires have no natural limit. No amount of fame is ever enough, because there's always someone more famous. No amount of power satisfies, because power is precarious and requires constant vigilance. No amount of wealth feels sufficient, because wealth is comparative. You always want more than others have. The person who chases these unlimited desires guarantees their own unhappiness. They're running on a treadmill that speeds up the faster they run. They can never reach satisfaction because satisfaction requires a limit, and these desires have no limit. Now watch what Epicurus does with this analysis. He says the wise person learns to need nothing beyond the natural and necessary, not through forced deprivation or ascetic discipline, but through understanding. Once you understand that fine food doesn't increase the pleasure of eating beyond what bread provides, once you see that fame brings anxiety rather than happiness, once you recognize that power requires constant struggle, you naturally release these false goals. This isn't about becoming a monk or rejecting all pleasure. It's about distinguishing real pleasures from fake ones, limited desires from unlimited ones, natural needs from artificial wants. And when you make these distinctions correctly, you discover something remarkable. The good life is cheap, it's accessible, it's stable. It doesn't depend on luck or circumstances or other people's approval. This is why the garden was structured as it was, a living demonstration of the philosophy. The Epicureans grew their own food, lived simply, shared resources, studied philosophy together, and achieved collective tranquility. They weren't withdrawing from the world out of weakness or defeat. They were creating an alternative to the dominant culture, showing that happiness doesn't require what Athens claimed it required. And this demonstration was more threatening than any argument. You could debate Epicurus in theory, but when people saw his students living happily on almost nothing, needing no luxury, fearing neither gods nor death, achieving tranquility while the ambitious and wealthy remained anxious and unsatisfied. The demonstration spoke louder than words. But here's where the debates begin, and they're still raging today. Critics then and now argue that Epicurus makes pleasure too simple, that human happiness involves more than just freedom from pain. They point out that we value things beyond subjective feeling: achievement, knowledge, love, beauty, meaning, growth. That a life of mere contentment, however tranquil, seems incomplete compared to a life of passionate engagement, even if that engagement brings disturbance. Aristotle argued that humans need activity, that we're not built for static contentment, that excellence and flourishing require challenge and effort. The Stoics argued that virtue is the only true good, that focusing on pleasure makes us vulnerable to circumstances beyond our control, that the wise person should be indifferent to pleasure and pain. These criticisms have force, but notice what they assume. They assume that challenge, effort, virtue, and achievement are valuable independent of the happiness they bring. Epicurus would ask, why? Why is challenge valuable if it doesn't make you happy? Why pursue virtue if it doesn't increase your well-being? Why seek achievement if success brings anxiety and failure brings pain? The burden of proof is on those who claim something besides happiness matters. They need to explain what it is and why we should care about it. Epicurus is offering something clearer, simpler, more empirically obvious. Everyone seeks pleasure and avoids pain, from the moment of birth, before any cultural conditioning. That's the natural standard, the criterion that needs no justification. Part 2. The Physics of Freedom: Why Atoms Matter for Ethics. Now we need to understand something that seems strange to modern readers. Epicurus devoted enormous attention to physics, to understanding the fundamental nature of reality. Why would someone focused on happiness spend so much time on atomic theory and cosmology? Because for Epicurus, ethics depends entirely on physics. If you don't understand how the universe actually works, you'll hold false beliefs that cause unnecessary suffering. And the two great sources of unnecessary suffering are fear of the gods and fear of death. Both of these fears depend on misunderstanding the nature of reality. Here's the foundation. Everything that exists is made of atoms and void, nothing else. Atoms are literally uncuttable, the smallest possible units of matter, solid, eternal, indestructible. They move through infinite empty space, colliding, combining, and separating according to natural laws. Everything we see, feel, think, experience is the result of atoms configured in particular patterns. Your body is atoms. Your mind is atoms. Your soul is atoms, particularly fine ones distributed throughout your body. The gods, if they exist, are atoms. The universe is infinite atoms moving through infinite space, with no beginning, no end, no purpose, no design. Think about what this eliminates. If everything is atoms following natural laws, then there's no room for supernatural intervention. Thunderstorms aren't Zeus's anger, they're atmospheric processes. Earthquakes aren't Poseidon's rage, they're geological movements. Disease isn't divine punishment, it's natural causation. Natural disasters aren't judgments, they're just physics. This systematically removes supernatural fear from every aspect of life. You don't need to worry about offending invisible powers, because there are no invisible powers. Everything operates by natural law, and natural law is regular, predictable, understandable. Let me make this more concrete. Imagine you're an ancient person watching lightning strike during a storm. The conventional explanation is that Zeus is angry, that someone has offended him, that he's punishing wrongdoing or sending a message. This creates terror. What did we do wrong? How do we appease him? What if he strikes again? This fear is constant, pervasive, uncontrollable. But Epicurus says no. Lightning is just electrical discharge in the atmosphere. It follows physical laws. It's not personal, not intentional, not a message. It happens in certain atmospheric conditions, regardless of human behavior. This single realization removes an entire category of fear. Now multiply this by every natural phenomenon, every earthquake, every disease, every drought, every flood. The conventional worldview says these are divine actions requiring interpretation and response. The Epicurean worldview says these are natural processes following physical laws. The psychological liberation is enormous. You don't live in constant fear of offending cosmic powers. You don't need to constantly appease, sacrifice, perform rituals. You can observe nature, understand its patterns, make predictions, take precautions, but you're not at the mercy of capricious divine will. But what about the gods? Here's where Epicurus becomes subtle. He doesn't deny the gods exist. That would have been legally dangerous in Athens, which had executed Socrates partly for impiety. Instead, he redefines them. If gods exist, they must be perfect beings. Perfect beings, by definition, need nothing and want nothing. They exist in a state of perfect happiness, perfect ataraxia. They have no desires to satisfy, no fears to overcome, no projects to complete. They simply exist in blissful tranquility. Now here's the crucial step. If gods are perfect and perfectly happy, they don't care about humans. They don't create worlds. That would imply need or desire. They don't intervene in nature. That would disturb their tranquility. They don't punish wrongdoing or reward virtue. That would require emotional involvement. To think otherwise is to make the gods imperfect, to project human concerns onto beings that are beyond such limitations. This is brilliant philosophy of religion. Epicurus isn't denying the gods. He's making them irrelevant. You can admire them as examples of perfect tranquility. You can contemplate them as philosophical ideals. But you can't fear them, pray to them, expect anything from them, or blame them for your suffering. Think about what this does to religious authority. If the gods don't care about human behavior, then priests have no special knowledge or power. If the gods don't respond to prayers and sacrifices, then religious rituals are empty theater. If the gods don't enforce moral laws, then claims of divine command are fraudulent. The entire religious system, the hierarchy, the authority, the control, collapses. Priests can't threaten you with divine punishment. Temples can't demand your sacrifices. Religious law can't claim special status. This is spiritually revolutionary, and religious authorities understood the threat immediately. But the real transformation comes with understanding death. This is where Epicurean physics becomes directly therapeutic. If the soul is made of atoms, and if these soul atoms are held together by the container of the body, then when the body dies and dissolves, the soul atoms scatter immediately. There's no gradual fading, no lingering consciousness, no awareness of dying. One moment, you exist as a configured pattern of atoms. The next moment, the pattern dissolves, and there's no you. Consciousness ends instantly with death, because consciousness is that pattern. And when the pattern breaks, consciousness ceases. The implication is staggering. There's no afterlife, no judgment, no punishment, no hell, no eternal suffering, no divine tribunal. Death is simply the end, final, complete, absolute. And because it's the end of consciousness, it's not an experience you'll have. You won't experience being dead any more than you experienced not yet being born. This removes the most powerful tool of religious control, the fear of punishment after death. If death is the end, then threats of hell are empty. If there's no judgment, then you're free to live according to reason rather than religious command. If consciousness ends, then you need only concern yourself with this life, not some imaginary next one. But here's where Epicurus faces a problem, and it's one that troubled ancient atomism and would trouble materialism for centuries. If atoms fall through void in straight lines due to their weight, and if everything operates by deterministic laws, then everything is predetermined. There's no free will, no genuine choice, no moral responsibility. And if there's no real choice, then Epicurus's entire ethical project collapses. You can't choose to pursue pleasure over pain if choice itself is an illusion. You can't be responsible for cultivating tranquility if your mental state is just the inevitable result of atomic motions you don't control. So Epicurus introduces one of the most controversial concepts in ancient philosophy, the swerve, or clinamen in Latin. At random, unpredictable moments, atoms swerve slightly from their downward path. Not by much, just the minimum deviation. But this tiny swerve breaks the chain of causation. It allows for chance, for spontaneity, for the possibility that the future isn't entirely determined by the past. It creates space for what we experience as free will, the ability to make genuine choices that aren't simply the mechanical result of prior causes. Now this swerve has been ridiculed for 2 millennia. The Stoics mocked it as arbitrary and unscientific. If atoms can swerve for no reason, why not other miraculous events? How is random motion any better than determinism for explaining choice? Modern scholars debate whether Epicurus was anticipating quantum indeterminacy or just making a desperate move to save free will. The physics is clearly problematic, but here's what's philosophically interesting. Epicurus recognized that a purely deterministic universe is incompatible with ethics, with the idea that we're responsible for our choices and can shape our lives. Rather than abandon ethics or accept determinism, he modified his physics to accommodate human experience. This is philosophy in service of human flourishing, not abstract consistency for its own sake. Think about what he's prioritizing. He could have a perfectly consistent physical system without the swerve. Everything follows deterministic laws, no exceptions, complete explanatory power. But this would mean humans are just complex machines. Our choices are illusions. Moral responsibility is meaningless, and his entire ethical project collapses. Or he can introduce the swerve, admittedly ad hoc, admittedly problematic, but preserve the possibility of genuine choice and meaningful ethical life. Epicurus chooses the second option. He's willing to sacrifice physical elegance for ethical necessity. This tells you what matters most in his system. Not theoretical perfection, but practical wisdom for living well. The atomic theory also explains how we know things. Objects constantly emit thin films of atoms, images or simulacra, like layers peeling off an onion. These atomic films travel through space and strike our sense organs, and this physical contact is what we experience as seeing, hearing, smelling. Even thoughts and dreams are caused by extremely fine atomic films penetrating our bodies. This means all sensation is fundamentally reliable. Our senses can't lie because they're just reporting physical impacts. When we make errors, it's not because our senses deceive us, but because we add judgment or interpretation beyond what the senses actually report. This has profound implications. It means empirical observation is the foundation of all knowledge. We can't trust abstract reasoning that contradicts sensory evidence. We can't trust revelations or mystical insights that bypass the senses. Knowledge builds from the ground up, from repeated sensory contacts that form general concepts in the mind. The universe itself is infinite in space and atoms. It has no center, no edge, no beginning, no end. Our world is just one of infinitely many worlds, forming and dissolving throughout infinite space. This removes human specialness. We're not the center of creation, not the purpose of existence, just temporary patterns in an eternal flow of matter. Modern physics has validated some Epicurean insights. Atoms exist, though they're not truly uncuttable. They have subatomic structure. The universe is vast, possibly infinite, with countless galaxies. Consciousness does depend on physical processes in the brain. Quantum mechanics includes genuine randomness, though not quite as the swerve imagined. But Epicurus was wrong about many specifics. Yet the core insight remains powerful. If we're material beings in a material universe, if consciousness is a product of physical processes, then many traditional fears are indeed irrational. There's no cosmic judge, no ultimate purpose, no grand design. Part 3. The Tetrapharmakos, 4 remedies for suffering. Now we arrive at the most practical distillation of Epicurean philosophy, the fourfold remedy, the Tetrapharmakos. These 4 maxims summarize the therapeutic core of the system. Don't fear God. Don't worry about death. What is good is easy to get. What is terrible is easy to endure. Each addresses a fundamental source of human anxiety. Together, they constitute a complete program for achieving tranquility. Let's examine each with the depth it deserves. First, don't fear God. We've already explored Epicurus's theology, but it's worth emphasizing why this was so central. In the ancient world, religion wasn't primarily about personal belief or morality. It was about managing the gods through ritual and sacrifice. People lived in constant anxiety about offending divine powers, about failing to perform the right ceremonies, about natural disasters as divine anger. Every thunderstorm might be Zeus's rage. Every illness might be Apollo's punishment. Every failure might signal divine disfavor. This created unbearable anxiety, constant vigilance, endless expense on sacrifices and priests. Epicurus said, this is all unnecessary suffering. The gods, if they exist, are perfect beings in perfect happiness. They need nothing, care about nothing outside their own tranquility. They don't create, sustain, or interfere with the world. They can't be bribed with sacrifice or flattered with prayer. They don't punish or reward. They're simply there, existing in blissful perfection, completely unconcerned with human affairs. This removes an entire category of anxiety. You don't need to worry about divine offense. Natural disasters are just physics. Success and failure are natural consequences and chance, not divine judgment. You're free to focus on what you can control, your own understanding, your own choices, your own pursuit of tranquility. Second remedy, don't worry about death. This is perhaps the most famous Epicurean argument, but also the most debated. The basic logic we've covered. Death is nothing to us, because when we exist, death isn't present, and when death is present, we don't exist. But let's dig deeper into why people fear death and whether Epicurus successfully addresses those fears. Some people fear the process of dying, the pain, the loss of control, the degradation. Epicurus acknowledges this is real, but argues that understanding death eliminates the existential terror. If death itself is nothing, if there's no judgment or punishment awaiting, then dying is just a transition from existence to non-existence, not a journey to an unknown destination. Some people fear missing out on future experiences. Epicurus responds that if you're dead, there's no you to be deprived. You can't be harmed by missing future goods because there's no subject to experience the deprivation. This is philosophically controversial. Critics argue that death harms you by making your life shorter than it would have been, even if you don't experience the harm. Some people fear for their loved ones after they're gone. Epicurus would say, this fear exists now, while you're alive, and can be addressed by making provisions, strengthening relationships, accepting what you can't control. But once you're dead, you won't exist to worry. The stronger Epicurean argument is about the symmetry of non-existence. Lucretius, the Roman poet who systematized Epicurean philosophy, put it beautifully. Look back at the eternity before you were born. Were you harmed by not existing during the age of dinosaurs, during ancient Egypt, during all of history before your birth? No, because you weren't there to be harmed. Why should the infinite future of your non-existence be any different? Both are periods of non-existence, symmetrical in all relevant respects. This argument is logically powerful, but psychologically, it often fails to convince. People's intuition suggests an asymmetry. We don't regret not being born earlier, but we do regret that we'll die and miss the future. Epicurus would likely say this asymmetry is irrational, a psychological bias rather than a genuine difference. Third remedy: what is good is easy to get. This follows from the analysis of desire we discussed. If the good life is defined by satisfying natural and necessary desires while maintaining tranquility, then the good life is accessible to almost everyone. You need food, but not gourmet food. You need water, but not fine wine. You need shelter, but not a mansion. You need safety, but not absolute security. You need friends, and friendship is free. You need philosophy to correct false beliefs, and philosophy is free or very cheap. This is radically egalitarian. The good life isn't reserved for the wealthy or powerful. A poor person can live well. A slave can achieve mental freedom. A woman in a patriarchal society can find happiness. All that matters is understanding the philosophy and living by it. Compare this to Aristotle, who argued that flourishing requires external goods: wealth, health, good birth, leisure for contemplation. The good life is inherently aristocratic. Epicurus democratized happiness. He said no, happiness doesn't require these advantages. They might be helpful, but they're not necessary. The core of the good life, tranquility through understanding and right desire, is available to everyone regardless of circumstances. But critics point out a problem. This radical independence from external goods is only possible if you truly believe Epicurean principles and have cultivated the right mental habits. But that requires education, leisure to study, intellectual capacity, and supportive community. These aren't equally available to everyone. A slave working 16 hours a day has little opportunity to study philosophy or cultivate tranquility. Fourth remedy: what is terrible is easy to endure. This is the weakest of the four remedies, and Epicurus knew it. The claim is that severe pains are usually brief, and chronic pains are usually mild. If pain is so intense it's unbearable, you'll either recover quickly or die quickly, ending the pain. If pain continues long-term, it must be mild enough to endure. Otherwise, it would kill you. Furthermore, mental pleasures can outweigh physical pains. By focusing on pleasant memories, philosophical insights, friendship, you can maintain tranquility even while experiencing bodily distress. This is empirically questionable. Many conditions involve severe chronic pain: kidney stones, migraines, arthritis, cancer. Modern medicine keeps people alive longer while suffering. The claim simply doesn't match reality. The stronger Epicurean argument is about mental suffering. Most of what we experience as suffering is mental: anxiety, regret, fear, shame, anger. These mental disturbances aren't inevitable. They arise from false beliefs and can be cured through philosophy. If you stop fearing death, stop fearing gods, stop chasing unlimited desires, stop comparing yourself to others, you remove most sources of disturbance. What remains, bodily pain and natural grief, is genuinely unavoidable but limited in scope. The tetrapharmakos functions as cognitive behavioral therapy. It identifies irrational beliefs causing distress, provides rational alternatives, encourages repeated practice to internalize new thought patterns. Modern therapy uses remarkably similar techniques, identifying cognitive distortions, challenging irrational thoughts, replacing them with more realistic beliefs. The key insight is that much suffering is optional, caused not by external circumstances, but by how we interpret those circumstances. Part 4. The Paradox of Friendship: Why Egoism Leads to Altruism. Now we turn to what might be Epicurus's most beautiful teaching: the centrality of friendship. Of all pleasures, wisdom proclaims friendship the greatest. This is his doctrine, and it creates an immediate problem for his philosophy. If pleasure is the only good, and if each person rationally pursues their own pleasure, how can genuine friendship exist? Doesn't hedonism make us fundamentally selfish, unable to care about others except as means to our own ends? Here's where Epicurus becomes psychologically sophisticated. He argues that friendship begins from self-interest. We seek friends for security, pleasant company, mutual aid. In the ancient world, without modern social safety nets, you depended on friends for survival. They help when you're sick, protect you from enemies, share resources in hard times. This is practical necessity, not sentiment. But something remarkable happens as friendships deepen. Your friend's happiness becomes a source of your happiness. You take pleasure in their pleasure. You suffer when they suffer. Your emotional lives become intertwined. This isn't calculation or strategy. It's natural psychological development. The more you interact with someone in trust and affection, the more your well-being becomes connected to theirs. So while friendship begins from self-interest, it develops into something that transcends simple egoism. You come to genuinely care about your friend's welfare as an end in itself. Yet this very caring is pleasurable for you. There's no contradiction. Pleasure and altruism can coincide. The deepest pleasures come precisely from caring about others. This is why Epicurus wrote that the wise person will even die for a friend under the right circumstances. This seems incompatible with pleasure seeking. How can dying be rational for a hedonist? But if your friend's happiness has become essential to your own happiness, if living with the knowledge that you betrayed them would make life unbearable, then dying to save them might genuinely be the choice that serves your overall well-being. Critics argue that this is still fundamentally selfish, that you're only helping your friend because it makes you feel good. True altruism would be caring about others independent of how it affects you. But Epicurus might respond that this critique assumes a false dichotomy. Why must we choose between self-interest and concern for others? Why can't they be integrated? When they are integrated, when your happiness and your friend's happiness are genuinely linked, then acting for their sake is acting for your sake. The two are inseparable. The garden was structured around friendship. Unlike Plato's Academy or Aristotle's Lyceum, which were formal educational institutions, the garden was intentionally communal, domestic, familial. Members shared meals, resources, daily life. Philosophical discussions were embedded in ordinary activities, not separated into formal lectures. And this was radical. Women studied as equals. Slaves participated in discussions. Foreigners were welcomed. The only requirement was commitment to the philosophy and to the community. Archaeological evidence from Herculaneum reveals extensive writing about friendship. Philodemus, an Epicurean philosopher, wrote treatises analyzing different types of friendship, how to cultivate them, how to resolve conflicts, how to maintain them. These texts show sophisticated thinking about trust, vulnerability, reciprocity, communication. Real friendship, Epicurean friendship, requires shared values and understanding, trust built over time, mutual benefit without exploitation, time spent together in pleasant activities. Modern research validates Epicurus's emphasis on friendship. Study after study shows that close relationships are among the strongest predictors of life satisfaction, mental health, physical health, and longevity. People with strong friendships are happier, healthier, and live longer than isolated individuals. The loneliness epidemic in modern societies suggests Epicurus was profoundly right about friendship's fundamental importance. Part 5. Justice without gods, the first social contract. Now we turn to Epicurus's political philosophy, which contains one of the earliest clear formulations of social contract theory in Western thought. If pleasure is the only good, and each person pursues their own pleasure, how can we have justice? Why should anyone obey laws or respect others' rights? The Epicurean answer is brilliant and unsettling. Justice isn't natural, isn't divinely ordained, isn't based on abstract moral truths. It's a human invention, a mutually beneficial agreement not to harm each other. Here's the logic. In a state without laws or cooperation, everyone would constantly fear being harmed. The strong would dominate the weak. No one could accumulate anything without losing it to theft. Life would be, as Hobbes would later write, nasty, brutish, and short. This state of constant fear is incompatible with tranquility. So rational individuals agree to a compact. I won't harm you if you don't harm me. We'll create rules and enforcement mechanisms to make this agreement stable. These rules are what we call justice. Notice what this implies. Justice is relative to time, place, and circumstance. What counts as just depends on what people have agreed to in their particular society. Different societies might have different laws, and that's fine as long as the laws serve mutual advantage. There's no cosmic justice, no natural law, no divine command. Justice is purely human, purely practical, purely instrumental. But Epicurus was careful here. He didn't advocate lawbreaking or revolution. In fact, he advised staying out of politics altogether. Live unknown was one of his famous sayings. Political engagement brings disturbance, competition, stress, danger. The wise person obeys laws not because they're inherently right, but because disobedience brings punishment and anxiety about punishment. Even unjust laws should generally be obeyed because the disturbance of lawbreaking exceeds any benefit. This political quietism was controversial. Aristotle argued that humans are political animals, that we achieve full humanity through participation in the polis. The Stoics said, we have duties to the broader human community. Epicurus said no. Political engagement generally harms individual happiness. The best life is lived in small communities of friends, focused on philosophy and simple pleasures rather than public affairs. But this raises difficult questions. What about injustice? If you see oppression, do you have any obligation to intervene? The Epicurean answer seems to be only if it serves your interest, if the victim is your friend, or if allowing injustice threatens social stability and eventually you. Critics argue this makes morality purely selfish, eliminating genuine duty to strangers, justifying indifference to suffering. Epicureans respond that friendship can extend broadly, that social instability harms everyone, that humans naturally feel empathy. But the foundation remains self-interest, even if enlightened and psychologically sophisticated. The deeper question is whether Epicurus can account for moral reasons not reducible to pleasure or self-interest. Can we say slavery is wrong, not just because it produces bad consequences, but because it violates dignity? Strict Epicureanism seems to require saying no. Part 6. The Canon, How to Know Truth. For Epicurus, understanding how we know became essential to the therapeutic project. If you can't distinguish truth from falsehood, you can't correct the false beliefs causing anxiety. You need a method, a canon or measuring stick for evaluating claims. Epicurus identified 3 criteria of truth: sensations, preconceptions, and feelings. Each plays a distinct role in building reliable knowledge. First, sensations. These are immediate contacts between sense organs and the world. When light enters your eye, sound enters your ear, molecules touch your tongue, you have sensation. These sensations are always true because they're just registering physical impacts. The eye doesn't lie. It reports what stimuli affect it. But obviously, senses seem to make mistakes. You see a stick in water that appears bent but is straight. How can senses always be true? Epicurus's answer is subtle. The error isn't in the sensation, but in the judgment you add. Your eyes accurately report the pattern of light entering them, which happens to look bent due to refraction. Your eyes are reporting correctly. The error comes when you judge there's a bent stick rather than just a visual appearance. This distinction between sensation and judgment is crucial. Sensations are passive, automatic, non-conceptual. They can't be wrong because they're not making claims. Judgments add concepts and inferences that might be invalid. So trust your senses, but be careful about judgments based on them. Second criterion, preconceptions. These are general concepts formed through repeated exposure to similar sensations. After many experiences of horses, your mind forms a general concept, horse, that captures commonalities. Preconceptions enable thinking and communication. They're reliable when properly formed from sufficient experience but can be distorted by insufficient evidence or social conditioning. Third criterion, feelings, specifically pleasure and pain. These are immediate bodily responses, telling us what promotes or harms our well-being. They're part of our natural equipment, providing guidance about value. Pleasure indicates good. Pain indicates harm. This doesn't mean pursuing every pleasure or avoiding every pain. Remember the hedonic calculus. But feelings are the basic data about value. These three criteria work together, building knowledge from the ground up without requiring innate ideas, divine revelation, or pure reason detached from experience. This is radical empiricism. Epicurus used analogical reasoning and inference to the best explanation for things beyond direct observation. We can't see atoms, but we infer them from observing that visible things have parts. The key principle: any explanation contradicting sensory evidence must be false. Among explanations compatible with evidence, prefer simpler, more natural ones over complex supernatural ones. This methodological naturalism was revolutionary, systematically excluding supernatural explanations, not by proving them false, but by showing they're unnecessary. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy uses similar techniques, examining evidence for anxiety, producing thoughts, testing beliefs against reality, replacing distorted thinking. Part 7. Living Epicureanism, Daily Practice in the Garden. Philosophy for Epicurus was an academic exercise but a way of life, a daily practice, a comprehensive method for achieving well-being. The garden was both school and household, a laboratory for living the philosophy. The daily rhythm centered on philosophical discussion and study, but not formal lectures. Active dialogue, questioning, examining beliefs, working through problems together. Everyone participated regardless of status. Women like Themista and Leontion were teachers. Slaves participated as equals in discussion. Students memorized the principal doctrines, the 40 key maxims summarizing the philosophy. They studied Epicurus's letters, providing theoretical instruction and practical guidance. But memorization wasn't rote learning. It was internalization, making teachings automatic and accessible. When anxiety arises, you need the right philosophical tool ready. Death is nothing to us, or don't fear the gods, become mantras, cognitive interventions interrupting irrational thought patterns. The practice included what Epicurus called parrhesia, frank speech. Students confessed anxieties, bad habits, false beliefs to teachers and fellow students. This required enormous trust, which is why friendship was central. Meals were particularly important. Simple shared food with good conversation. Not banquets or feasts, but bread, vegetables, water, occasionally cheese or wine. The act of eating together reinforced community, provided opportunity for discussion, demonstrated that pleasure doesn't require luxury. There was attention to physical health, exercise, diet, rest, medical care when necessary. But don't become obsessed with health as an end in itself. It's instrumentally valuable for maintaining capacity for pleasure. The garden aimed for modest self-sufficiency, growing food, maintaining property. Manual work wasn't denigrated as in aristocratic Greek culture. There was time for reflection, examining your mental state, catching false beliefs, cultivating gratitude. Philodemus wrote about recalling past pleasures, especially pleasant times with friends. Memory becomes a source of present pleasure. The Epicurean also practices gratitude, consciously appreciating what they have rather than focusing on what they lack. Each simple pleasure, cool water, conversation, beautiful sunset, is noticed and savored. This mindful appreciation of present experience is central to maintaining tranquility. The community had rituals and celebrations, gathering monthly to commemorate Epicurus's birthday, not worship, but gratitude for the teaching. These rituals created rhythms, strengthened group identity, provided occasions for reflection. Modern applications face unique challenges. We can't easily achieve self-sufficiency. We're embedded in global systems requiring participation. We have mortgages, careers, obligations limiting how fully we can adopt ancient practices. But core principles remain applicable. Distinguish necessary from unnecessary desires. Cultivate simple pleasures. Prioritize friendship. Challenge irrational fears. Pursue tranquility. Practice gratitude. You don't need to live communally to be Epicurean. You can apply the philosophy within whatever circumstances you inhabit. Part 8. The critics strike back. 2,000 years of attack. No philosophy survives 2 millennia without fierce opposition, and Epicureanism faced perhaps the most sustained criticism of any ancient school. The Stoics were primary philosophical opponents. They agreed that achieving tranquility was the goal, but had radically different methods. For Stoics, tranquility comes from virtue, from living according to nature and reason, from accepting whatever happens as divine providence. They attacked Epicurean hedonism as confused about human nature. Humans are rational beings. Our good lies in exercising rationality excellently, which is virtue. Pleasure isn't the goal, but a side effect. Focusing on pleasure makes us dependent on externals beyond our control. The Stoics mocked the swerve. How can random atomic deviation explain free will? It makes choice arbitrary, not free and rational. They attacked Epicurean withdrawal from politics as cowardly selfishness. Humans are social beings with duties to fellow humans. Retreating to pursue personal tranquility while the world suffers is moral failure. Epicureans responded that Stoic virtue is just another false belief causing suffering. Stoics claim indifference to pain, but this is either false or inhuman. Stoic acceptance of whatever happens as divinely ordained is a rational belief no better than conventional religion. Political engagement brings constant disturbance. Platonists offered different criticisms. If there's no immaterial soul, no eternal forms, no transcendent good, then there's no foundation for morality, no objective truth, no higher purpose. Epicurean ethics reduces to subjective preference. Epicureans responded that Platonic forms are metaphysical fantasies with no evidence. We can explain ethics through human nature without positing invisible, transcendent entities. But the most sustained attack came from Christianity. The early church fathers saw Epicureanism as the ultimate enemy. They argued Epicurean physics was atheistic. Gods who do nothing aren't really gods. This removes all moral foundation, all meaning from suffering, all hope for justice beyond this life. Epicurean hedonism was portrayed as pig philosophy, reducing humans to animals seeking bodily pleasure. Christianity taught that humans are made in God's image, have immortal souls, are called to transcend bodily desire. The denial of afterlife was particularly offensive. If there's no judgment after death, no heaven or hell, then wickedness goes unpunished and virtue unrewarded. This life's injustices are never rectified. This is intolerable nihilism, destroying all meaning. Christians attacked Epicurean withdrawal as shirking duty to care for the poor, spread the gospel, build God's kingdom. The garden was selfish isolation. These attacks were so effective that Epicureanism virtually disappeared in Christian Europe. Epicurus's works weren't copied by Christian scribes. His philosophy was taught only as error to be refuted. For more than 1,000 years, Epicureanism survived mostly through hostile accounts. The rediscovery of Lucretius's On the Nature of Things in 1417 sparked Renaissance interest, but open advocacy remained dangerous well into the Enlightenment. Modern critics added new objections. John Stuart Mill argued Epicurus was right, that pleasure is the good, but wrong about how to maximize it. Mill distinguished higher and lower pleasures. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. Nietzsche attacked Epicureanism as slave morality, philosophy for people too weak to embrace life's struggle. Real flourishing requires engagement, risk, overcoming. Epicurean withdrawal is life-denying cowardice. Existentialists argued Epicurean tranquility is inauthentic, escaping from anxiety that reveals our being toward death. Feminist critics noted that while progressive and including women, Epicureanism didn't fundamentally challenge gender oppression. Marxists attacked Epicurean individualism and withdrawal as bourgeois ideology serving ruling class interests. Part 9. Where Epicureanism fails, internal contradictions. Now, we must examine problems emerging from Epicureanism's own logic. First, the foundational problem, the relationship between pleasure as criterion and tranquility as goal. Epicurus claims pleasure is the only good, but also claims the highest pleasure is tranquility, the absence of disturbance. Is pleasure the sensation of satisfaction or the state of equilibrium? If pleasure is primarily active satisfaction, then tranquility isn't pleasure, but absence of pleasure. But Epicurus insists tranquility is the highest pleasure. This seems to redefine pleasure, losing empirical grounding. Second, the tension between egoism and friendship. Epicurus claims every action is ultimately self-interested, pursuing one's own pleasure. But true friendship involves caring for the friend's welfare for their own sake. The reconciliation that your friend's welfare becomes part of your own seems ultimately selfish. If you could be happy without caring, you'd have no reason to care. This misses what's valuable about genuine concern for another independent of how it feels. Third, the limitation to present pleasures and pains. Epicurus argues only present matters because you can only experience the present. But humans care about lives as narratives, about accomplishment and legacy extending beyond present experience. Epicureanism can't account for this temporal dimension. Fourth, the gap between theory and practice regarding desire management. Epicurus says, eliminate unnecessary desires, but human psychology doesn't work this cleanly. Once you've experienced luxury, it's extremely difficult to find simplicity equally satisfying. Hedonic adaptation works both ways. Fifth, quietism and political indifference seem strategically mistaken. Your tranquility depends on social stability, rule of law, protection. If everyone withdraws, who maintains these public goods? And if they collapse, your garden provides no protection. Sixth, the treatment of pain and suffering. The claim that severe pain is brief and chronic pain, mild, is empirically false. Many conditions involve severe chronic pain. Extreme pain overwhelms consciousness, making philosophical reflection impossible. Seventh, the arbitrariness of the swerve. It's introduced solely to save free will, with no independent justification. It makes atomic motion random, undermining natural explanation. Eighth, the gods. If gods exist but do nothing, why maintain the concept? It seems like verbal sleight of hand to avoid prosecution for atheism. Ninth, social contract theory has holes. If justice is mutual agreement for advantage, we have no obligations to those outside the contract. Future generations, distant people, the severely disabled. The powerful might calculate that breaking the contract provides more pleasure than keeping it. 10th, the perfectionism implicit in the sage ideal. The sage who's achieved perfect tranquility is so beyond normal capacity, it's useless as guidance. Finally, the meta problem. Epicureanism claims to be based on nature and reason alone, but it requires enormous faith in comprehensive metaphysical claims about atoms, consciousness, non-existence of afterlife. If any fundamental claim is wrong, the structure collapses. Part 10. Modern Epicureanism, Ancient Wisdom for Contemporary Crisis. We arrive at the crucial question: what does Epicureanism offer us today? In some ways, modernity has vindicated Epicurus. Modern neuroscience confirms materialism about mind. Consciousness is produced by brain activity. When the brain dies, consciousness ends. This supports the claim that death is the end of experience. Evolutionary psychology supports insights about human nature and motivation. We're shaped by selection to seek pleasure and avoid pain. Modern happiness research produces findings remarkably consistent with Epicurean claims. Studies show that beyond moderate income for basic needs, additional wealth produces little additional life satisfaction. This supports the claim that natural and necessary desires are easily satisfied and unlimited desires are futile. Research confirms close relationships are the strongest predictor of well-being. Studies on hedonic adaptation show people return to baseline happiness after both positive and negative events. We adapt to luxury and take it for granted. Cognitive behavioral therapy uses techniques remarkably similar to Epicurean therapy, identifying irrational beliefs, challenging them, providing alternatives, encouraging behavioral experiments. Mindfulness-based therapies echo Epicurean practice, attending to present experience, accepting rather than resisting, distinguishing raw sensation from mental elaboration, cultivating gratitude. The voluntary simplicity movement draws directly on Epicurean principles. People choosing to downshift, reduce work, live with less, focus on experiences and relationships. Environmental concerns make Epicurean simplicity urgent. Consumer capitalism is destroying the planet. We need philosophical frameworks valuing sufficiency over excess. Epicureanism offers a philosophy of enough. The loneliness epidemic makes Epicurean emphasis on community desperately relevant. People are digitally connected but socially isolated. We have thousands of social media friends, but few close relationships. The crisis of meaning in secular modernity also makes Epicureanism relevant. If there's no God, no afterlife, no cosmic purpose, where do we find meaning? Epicureanism offers an alternative. Meaning comes from living well, from pleasure and tranquility, from friendship. Life doesn't need external validation to be worth living. The good life is its own justification. But modernity also reveals limitations. Global problems require collective action that Epicurean quietism can't provide. We can't all withdraw while the world burns. Technological development creates pleasures Epicurus never imagined. Virtual reality, AI, biotechnology. Should we pursue technological pleasures, even if unnatural? Should we enhance ourselves beyond biological limits? The experience machine thought experiment challenges hedonism. If you could plug into a machine simulating perfect experiences, would you? Most people say no, suggesting we value something beyond subjective feeling. Perhaps authenticity, reality, actual achievement. Modern psychology complicates the picture. Happiness involves more than pleasure and absence of pain. Flow states, engagement, meaning, personal growth contribute to well-being not captured by pleasure alone. So what is modern Epicureanism? It can't be simple revival of ancient doctrine. It must adapt to modern knowledge and problems while preserving core insights. Live simply with minimal dependence on consumer goods. Cultivate deep friendships and community. Practice gratitude and mindfulness. Challenge anxiety-producing beliefs. Pursue meaningful work aligned with values. Engage politically on issues that matter while protecting personal well-being. Accept mortality while living fully. Ground ethics in naturalism without supernatural beliefs. This isn't pure Epicureanism. It incorporates insights from other traditions, makes different trade-offs, adapts to modern circumstances. But it draws on Epicurean wisdom as a major resource. Several contemporary philosophers have developed neo-Epicurean positions. Modern Epicurean communities exist, though small and scattered. Online groups study and discuss the philosophy. Some attempt local communities inspired by the garden. But Epicureanism hasn't achieved mass appeal. It seems too quiet, too modest, too accepting for an age valuing ambition. It counsels contentment when culture promotes constant striving. Yet perhaps this is precisely why it matters. The dominant culture is making us miserable, chasing endlessly after more, comparing ourselves to impossible standards, destroying the planet in the process. We need alternatives. We need philosophies that say, enough is enough, that value being over having, that find wealth in friendship rather than possessions. Epicureanism will never be dominant because it doesn't promise power, glory, transformation. It offers something more modest, but perhaps more achievable, a good life within the limits of nature and mortality. Not everything you might want, but everything you truly need. Not immortality, but mortal life well lived. Not cosmic purpose, but earthly pleasure, friendship, and tranquility. In an age of anxiety, in a time of climate catastrophe, in a world of artificial needs and manufactured desires, in a culture of comparison and competition, maybe the ancient Greek philosopher, with his simple garden, has something essential to teach us. The wisdom that happiness is possible, is natural, is within reach, if only we understand what we truly need and free ourselves from what we don't. That's Epicurus's gift across the centuries. The possibility of tranquility through understanding, the promise of pleasure through simplicity, the path to the good life through nature, reason, and friendship. Whether we accept that gift depends on whether we can overcome our cultural conditioning, our endless wanting, our fear of missing out, our belief that more is always better. It depends on whether we have the courage to say, this, here, now, is enough. I'm content, I'm pleased. The Epicurean answer would be clear. Prioritize friendship above almost everything else. Structure your life to allow for regular deep connection with a small group of close friends. This might mean living near friends, working less, owning less, simplifying life to create time and energy for relationships. The garden model, people living together in a philosophical community, remains attractive to many who feel isolated in modern individualistic societies. But there's practical wisdom here beyond just communal living. Even if you can't live with your friends, you can create regular rhythms of connection. Weekly dinners, monthly philosophical discussions, annual retreats, daily check-ins. The specific form matters less than the consistency and depth. And there's something else Epicurus understood that we've forgotten. Friendship isn't just about having fun together or getting emotional support. It's about mutual philosophical development, about helping each other understand truth, about correcting each other's false beliefs, about supporting each other in pursuing tranquility. This requires a level of honesty and vulnerability that most modern friendships lack. We're friends with people because we enjoy their company, but we avoid deep discussions about what we truly believe, what we truly fear, what we're actually pursuing in life. We keep things light, superficial, safe. Epicurean friendship goes deeper. It asks, what false beliefs are causing you anxiety? What unnecessary desires are you chasing? What fears are preventing your tranquility? And it offers frank answers, even when they're uncomfortable. This level of intimacy and honesty is rare today, but it's precisely what makes friendship transformative rather than merely pleasant. Part 11. The Christian Assault: How Faith Destroyed Philosophy. Now we must confront the historical reality that nearly destroyed Epicureanism, the rise of Christianity and its systematic campaign to eradicate Epicurean thought. This isn't just intellectual history. It's a story about power, control, and the suppression of alternative visions of human flourishing. When Christianity became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire in the 4th century CE, Epicureanism became enemy number one. Why? Because every major Christian doctrine directly contradicted Epicurean teaching. Christians taught that this world is fallen, corrupt, a vale of tears we must endure before reaching true happiness in heaven. Epicurus taught that this world is all there is, that happiness is achievable here and now through understanding and simple living. Christians taught that the body is sinful, that physical pleasure is temptation, that we must mortify the flesh to purify the soul. Epicurus taught that bodily pleasure is natural and good, that the body and soul are inseparable, that denying natural needs causes suffering. Christians taught that suffering has redemptive value, that martyrdom brings glory, that earthly pain is preparation for heavenly reward. Epicurus taught that suffering has no value in itself, that we should minimize pain, that there's no reward after death, because death is the end. Christians taught that we must submit to God's will, accept divine providence, trust that suffering serves God's mysterious purposes. Epicurus taught that the gods are irrelevant to human life, that we're responsible for our own happiness, that understanding natural causes removes the need for divine explanation. Christians taught that we're sinners needing salvation, that we can't achieve goodness through our own efforts, that grace comes only through faith in Christ. Epicurus taught that we're naturally capable of happiness, that philosophy provides all we need, that salvation is self-achieved through understanding. Think about what this meant for church authorities. If Epicurus is right, then Christianity is unnecessary. You don't need Jesus to save you from sin. You just need philosophy to free you from false beliefs. You don't need the church to mediate between you and God. The gods don't care about you anyway. You don't need sacraments, priests, rituals, doctrine. You need bread, water, friends, and understanding. The entire edifice of Christian authority collapses if Epicureanism is true. So Christian theologians launched a systematic attack Tertullian in the 2nd century, Augustine in the 4th and 5th centuries, and countless others portrayed Epicureanism as the philosophy of pigs, of people who reduce human existence to animal pleasure. They deliberately misrepresented Epicurean hedonism, ignoring the distinction between kinetic and katastomatic pleasure, ignoring the emphasis on mental tranquility, ignoring the sophisticated hedonic calculus. They created a caricature, Epicureans, as gluttons, drunkards, sexual libertines, that had nothing to do with actual Epicurean practice. They argued that Epicurean denial of afterlife removes all moral foundation, that without divine punishment, people will do whatever they want, that society will collapse into chaos without religious authority. They portrayed Epicureanism as nihilism, as despair, as denial of everything meaningful. And most devastatingly, they stopped copying Epicurean texts. In the manuscript culture of the Middle Ages, books survived only if monks copied them. Christian monks copied Plato because they could Christianize his forms as God's ideas. They copied Aristotle because his prime mover could become the Christian God. But they didn't copy Epicurus because his philosophy was irredeemably anti-Christian. Of his 300 works, only a handful of letters and fragments survived, preserved mostly in the writings of critics. For more than 1,000 years, Epicureanism was known primarily through hostile accounts. Students learned about Epicurus only as an example of error to be refuted. The philosophy that had offered liberation from fear, that had democratized happiness, that had shown the way to tranquility, it was buried, distorted, nearly destroyed. This is what happens when power fears philosophy. Not because the philosophy is wrong. Christian theologians couldn't refute Epicurus through pure argument, but because it threatens their authority, their control, their system of meaning that requires fear, guilt, and dependence. The rediscovery of Lucretius's On the Nature of Things in 1417 by Poggio Bracciolini changed everything. This poem, the fullest surviving account of Epicurean philosophy, had been lost for centuries, forgotten in a German monastery. When Renaissance humanists read it, they were stunned. Here was a complete alternative to Christian worldview, a naturalistic, materialistic, hedonistic philosophy that made no reference to sin, salvation, or divine judgment. It spread through Europe like wildfire, copied and recopied, studied and debated. But even then, open advocacy of Epicureanism remained dangerous. The church still had power. Heresy could mean death. So Renaissance thinkers had to be careful, praising Lucretius as poetry, while distancing themselves from his philosophy, admiring his Latin while rejecting his materialism. Only gradually, as religious authority weakened during the Enlightenment, could thinkers openly embrace Epicurean principles. And even then, the Christian caricature persisted. To this day, most people think Epicurean means someone who enjoys fine food and luxury, the exact opposite of what Epicurus actually taught. Part 12. The Return of Epicurus. Why modern science vindicates ancient wisdom. Now we arrive at one of the most remarkable aspects of Epicurean philosophy. How much of it has been vindicated by modern science? Remember, Epicurus was working 2,300 years ago, with no telescopes, no microscopes, no laboratories, no experimental methods. Yet his fundamental insights about reality have proven remarkably accurate. Start with atomic theory. Epicurus said, everything is made of invisible particles moving through empty space. For 2,000 years, this was dismissed as speculation, impossible to verify. But in the early 20th century, physics confirmed it. Matter is indeed made of atoms. Even more remarkably, atoms do follow probabilistic rather than purely deterministic laws. Quantum mechanics includes genuine randomness, echoing Epicurus's swerve even if the details differ. The universe is vast beyond comprehension, possibly infinite, with countless galaxies, echoing Epicurus's claim of infinite space and infinitely many worlds. Consciousness depends on physical brain processes. Damage specific brain regions, and you damage specific aspects of consciousness. Alter brain chemistry, and you alter mental states. When the brain dies, neural activity stops, and consciousness ends. There's no empirical evidence for consciousness existing independently of functioning brains. This vindicates Epicurean materialism about the soul. Death appears to be the end of experience, just as Epicurus argued. Natural phenomena have natural causes. Lightning is electrical discharge. Earthquakes are plate tectonics. Disease is caused by microorganisms and genetic factors, not divine punishment. The gods, if they exist, don't intervene in nature. This wasn't just lucky guessing. Epicurus had a method, a commitment to naturalistic explanation, a refusal to invoke supernatural causes. This methodological naturalism became the foundation of modern science. But the vindication goes beyond physics. Modern psychology supports Epicurean insights about human nature and happiness. We do seek pleasure and avoid pain. This is hardwired into our biology. Dopamine systems reward behaviors that promoted survival and reproduction in our evolutionary past. Basic pleasures like food, safety, and social connection are universal across cultures. Happiness research confirms that beyond moderate income sufficient for basic needs, additional wealth produces little additional life satisfaction. This is called the Easterlin paradox. As countries get richer, average happiness doesn't increase proportionally. People adapt to higher living standards and return to baseline happiness. This supports Epicurus's claim that natural and necessary desires are easily satisfied and that chasing unlimited desires is futile. The hedonic treadmill, the tendency to return to baseline happiness despite positive or negative events, validates Epicurean emphasis on mental tranquility over external circumstances. Studies on relationships confirm that close friendships are the strongest predictor of well-being, more important than wealth, fame, or achievement. The Harvard study of adult development, tracking people for over 80 years, found that relationship quality in midlife predicted health and happiness in old age better than any other factor. People with strong social connections are happier, healthier, and live longer. This vindicates Epicurus's claim that friendship is the greatest pleasure. Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most empirically validated psychological treatments, uses techniques remarkably similar to Epicurean therapy, identifying irrational beliefs causing distress, challenging them with evidence and reason, replacing them with more accurate beliefs, practicing new thought patterns. The core CBT principle that much suffering comes from interpretation rather than events themselves echoes Epicurean teaching that false beliefs cause unnecessary anxiety. Mindfulness-based therapies, also empirically supported, share Epicurean emphasis on present moment awareness, distinguishing raw sensation from mental elaboration, accepting rather than resisting experience, cultivating gratitude for simple pleasures. Modern positive psychology distinguishes hedonic well-being, focused on pleasure, from eudaimonic well-being, focused on meaning. suggesting both matter. This echoes the ancient debate between Epicureans and Aristotelians, with contemporary research suggesting Epicurus captured something real about human psychology, even if not the whole story. Environmental science vindicates Epicurean warnings about unlimited growth. Consumer capitalism's promise that more consumption brings more happiness has proven false. We've quintupled GDP per capita in developed nations since 1950, but average happiness has remained flat or decreased. We're consuming resources at unsustainable rates, destroying ecosystems, changing the climate, all in pursuit of unlimited desires that Epicurus warned would never bring satisfaction. The philosophy of enough, of finding maximum pleasure with minimal resources, isn't just ancient wisdom. It's survival necessity for our species. But here's what's most remarkable. Epicurus didn't have modern science, but he had something equally important: clear thinking about what we can observe, refusal to accept explanations that multiply entities unnecessarily, commitment to following evidence wherever it leads, willingness to challenge authority and conventional belief. These intellectual virtues, combined with careful observation and logical reasoning, led him to insights that took modern science 2,000 years to confirm. This suggests something profound about philosophy's power. Even without advanced technology, even without laboratories, philosophical reasoning based on experience and logic can discover deep truths about reality. Science has better tools, better methods, better data, but it's built on the same foundation Epicurus established: empirical observation, natural explanation, logical inference, rejection of supernatural causes. The vindication isn't complete, of course. Epicurus was wrong about many specifics. Atoms aren't uncuttable. They have subatomic structure. Images don't peel off objects and travel to our eyes. His astronomical theories were often incorrect. The swerve isn't how quantum indeterminacy works, but he was right about the big picture: matter, space, natural law, material basis of consciousness, mortality of the soul, indifference of gods or their non-existence, possibility of happiness through simple living and understanding. More right than wrong. More prescient than we had any right to expect from someone working with such primitive tools. This should make us humble about dismissing ancient wisdom. Yes, modern science knows more, but philosophical insights about human nature, about what makes life worth living, about how to achieve happiness, these aren't primarily empirical questions requiring advanced technology. They're questions about human experience that any reflective person in any era can explore. Epicurus explored them with extraordinary clarity and came to conclusions that remain relevant, remain true, remain helpful 23 centuries later. That's the power of philosophy done well. Part 13. The ultimate question: was Epicurus right? We've explored the philosophy in depth, examined its strengths and weaknesses, seen how it was attacked and suppressed, discovered its vindication by modern science. Now we must face the ultimate question: was Epicurus fundamentally right about how to live? Is pleasure really the only good? Is tranquility the highest goal? Is the simple life the best life? Can happiness be achieved through understanding alone? These aren't merely theoretical questions. They're existential ones. If Epicurus is right, then most of what modern culture tells us is wrong. The pursuit of wealth beyond basic needs is pointless. The quest for fame is self-defeating. Political ambition brings disturbance, not satisfaction. Luxury doesn't increase pleasure. Competition and comparison make us miserable. Endless growth is impossible and undesirable. Everything our economy is built on, everything advertising tells us, everything social media encourages, it's all chasing false goods that can never bring lasting happiness. But if Epicurus is wrong, if there's more to human flourishing than pleasure and tranquility, then his philosophy is inadequate, however psychologically appealing. Maybe we need challenge, growth, achievement, meaning beyond mere contentment. Maybe withdrawal from politics is selfish when injustice demands engagement. Maybe simple living is impoverishment, not liberation. Maybe pleasure is too thin a conception of the good life. Let me try to be fair to both sides. In favor of Epicurus, consider that most people who achieve what society says brings happiness, wealth, success, fame, report feeling empty, anxious, unfulfilled. Consider how consumer culture makes us perpetually dissatisfied, always wanting more, never content with what we have. Consider how fear of death poisons every moment, how worry about what others think controls our choices, how chasing status and comparing ourselves to others makes us miserable. Epicurean teaching directly addresses these sources of unhappiness. Stop chasing unlimited desires. They can never be satisfied. Stop fearing death. It's literally nothing. Stop worrying about divine judgment. The gods don't care. Stop comparing yourself to others. The only relevant question is whether you're tranquil. Cultivate simple pleasures, deep friendships, philosophical understanding. These are achievable, stable, within your control. If you actually did this, if you truly internalized Epicurean principles, you would likely be significantly happier than you are. Research supports this. People who live simply, prioritize relationships, practice gratitude, accept mortality, don't fear divine judgment. They report higher life satisfaction. Epicurean wisdom works. But against Epicurus, consider that many of humanity's greatest achievements came from people who weren't seeking tranquility. Artists driven by creative obsession, scientists pursuing truth despite personal cost, activists fighting injustice despite danger, entrepreneurs building businesses despite risk, athletes pushing physical limits despite pain. These people aren't tranquil. They're passionate, driven, struggling. But they often report deep meaning and satisfaction that mere contentment can't match. Consider also that Epicurean withdrawal from politics seems morally inadequate when injustice demands response. If you're tranquil in your garden while others suffer oppression, are you living well? Or are you selfishly indifferent? Consider that some suffering seems worth it for the sake of achievements, relationships, experiences that matter. Raising children brings tremendous suffering, sleepless nights, constant worry, sacrifice of personal time and resources. But most parents wouldn't trade it for childless tranquility. The suffering is part of something meaningful. Consider that death might be bad for you, even if you don't experience it. Your life is cut short. Your projects are left incomplete. Your potential is unrealized. This seems like genuine harm, even if you're not around to feel harmed. So who's right? Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe Epicurus captures something essential about happiness while missing other dimensions of human flourishing. Maybe his philosophy works brilliantly for some people in some circumstances while proving inadequate for others. Here's what I think. Epicurus is right that most people would be happier if they followed his teaching. Most of us are anxious, stressed, chasing false goods, fearing unnecessary things, making ourselves miserable through false beliefs and unlimited desires. For most people, Epicurean wisdom would dramatically improve their lives. But Epicurus might be wrong, that tranquility is the only thing that matters, that pleasure is the sole good. Some people genuinely need more, need challenge, growth, achievement, passionate engagement with difficult problems. For them, Epicurean withdrawal would be impoverishment, not liberation. The question isn't whether Epicurus is universally right, but whether he's right for you, right now, given your temperament, circumstances, life stage. Maybe you need Epicurean simplicity and tranquility right now because you're burned out, anxious, chasing false goods. Maybe later, you'll need something else. Challenge, passion, engagement. Or maybe you're the rare person who truly thrives on challenge and for whom tranquility would be boredom. The honest answer is that philosophy can't give you a universal algorithm for living. It can offer wisdom, insights, tools, perspectives. But you have to do the work of figuring out what works for you. Try living more simply. See if it brings happiness or impoverishment. Practice gratitude for simple pleasures. See if it increases satisfaction or feels like settling. Prioritize friendship over achievement. See if it enriches your life or leaves you unfulfilled. Challenge your fears about death and judgment. See if it brings freedom or anxiety. The proof is in the living. Philosophy isn't just theory. It's practice, experiment, lived experience. Epicurus offers a comprehensive vision of the good life. Test it. Live it. See if it works. If it does, you found something precious. If it doesn't, at least you've learned something about yourself and what you truly need. That's all philosophy can offer. Not certainty, not universal truth, but wisdom worth testing, principles worth trying, a path worth exploring to see where it leads you. Part 14. Epicurus and the Meaning Crisis, Ancient Answers to Modern Questions. Let's now address something Epicurus couldn't have anticipated, but that makes his philosophy urgently relevant today. What philosophers call the meaning crisis. In traditional societies, meaning came from religion, from clearly defined roles, from stable communities, from cultural narratives everyone shared. You knew who you were, what you were supposed to do, what your life was for. The modern world has shattered all of this. We've undermined religious authority without replacing it with anything equally robust. We've dissolved traditional communities without creating new forms of genuine belonging. We've questioned every cultural narrative without agreeing on new ones. The result is epidemic anxiety, depression, nihilism, the sense that nothing means anything, that life is pointless, that we're just biological machines going through motions until we die. This is the meaning crisis, and it's not just philosophical abstraction. It's affecting millions of people's actual lives. They're successful by conventional standards, but feel empty. They have everything society says they should want, but can't shake the feeling that it's all meaningless. They achieve their goals, but find no satisfaction in achievement. They're drowning in options, but paralyzed by choice. They're connected to everyone, but intimate with no one. Here's where Epicurus becomes profoundly relevant. He faced a similar crisis. The Hellenistic world he lived in was also a time of meaning collapse. The old city-state structure, with its clear roles and values, was dissolving. Alexander's conquests had mixed cultures and undermined traditional certainties. People felt lost in vast impersonal empires. Religious skepticism was growing. Traditional answers weren't working anymore. Sound familiar? Into this crisis, Epicurus offered something radical, Meaning doesn't come from outside, from gods or society or cultural narratives. It comes from within, from understanding your own nature and living according to it. You don't need cosmic purpose to have a worthwhile life. You need pleasure, friendship, and tranquility. These are natural, achievable, sufficient. This is both liberating and challenging. Liberating because you're not dependent on external validation, on fulfilling some predetermined role, on achieving socially approved goals. You can opt out of the rat race, the status competition, the endless striving for more. You can find meaning in simple things, in bread and water shared with friends, in philosophical conversation, in watching the sunset, in being free from pain and disturbance. Challenging because it removes excuses. You can't blame society. Blame your circumstances. Blame lack of opportunities for your unhappiness. If Epicurus is right, happiness is available right now, regardless of external conditions, through understanding and right living. The only thing preventing it is your own false beliefs and misguided desires. Modern research supports Epicurean insights about meaning. Studies distinguish between two types of meaning: cosmic meaning, does the universe have purpose? And terrestrial meaning, does my life have purpose? People can lack the first while having the second. You can believe the universe is meaningless, just atoms and void, no divine plan, while finding deep meaning in your relationships, your work, your projects, your experiences. In fact, some research suggests that accepting cosmic meaninglessness can paradoxically increase terrestrial meaning. When you stop waiting for some external source to give your life purpose, you take responsibility for creating it yourself. You choose what matters. You decide what's worth doing. This is existential freedom, and while it's terrifying, there's no script, no guarantee, no predetermined answer. It's also empowering. Epicurus anticipated this. He said, "There's no cosmic purpose. The universe is just atoms following natural laws." But this doesn't make life meaningless. Life has whatever meaning you give it through the choices you make, the pleasures you cultivate, the relationships you build, the understanding you achieve. The good life is its own meaning, its own justification. It doesn't need to serve some higher purpose to be worthwhile. But here's where many modern people struggle with Epicurean answers. They feel that pleasure and tranquility, however nice, aren't enough. They need something more, some sense that their life matters beyond their own subjective experience, that they're contributing to something larger, that they're making a difference that outlasts them. This is where Epicureanism seems weakest. Its focus on personal tranquility seems self-centered. Its withdrawal from politics seems irresponsible. Its emphasis on simplicity seems like giving up on human potential. If everyone became Epicurean, who would cure diseases, create art, fight injustice, explore space, push civilization forward? Doesn't humanity need people who sacrifice personal tranquility for greater achievements? Maybe. But Epicurus might respond, what good are these achievements if they don't increase human happiness? What's the point of curing diseases if the healthy people are still anxious and miserable? What's the value of exploring space if it doesn't make anyone more tranquil? What's the purpose of fighting injustice if the victors remain disturbed and dissatisfied? This is provocative, but worth considering. Maybe we've fetishized achievement and progress without asking whether they actually serve human flourishing. Maybe the anxious overachiever isn't living better than the contented simple person, despite society's reverence for ambition. Maybe material and technological progress have made us materially better off without making us happier. Maybe what humanity needs most isn't more innovation or exploration, but more wisdom about how to live well with what we already have. The meaning crisis suggests that despite all our achievements, despite incredible material abundance, despite technological wonders, people feel more lost, more anxious, more depressed than ever. This suggests we've been pursuing the wrong things, climbing the wrong ladders, optimizing for the wrong metrics. Epicurus offers course correction. Stop optimizing for GDP growth, technological advancement, competitive achievement. Start optimizing for human happiness, for tranquility, for friendship, for simple pleasures. Measure success not by how much we produce or consume, but by how well we live, how content we are, how free from fear and disturbance. This isn't giving up on progress. It's redefining what progress means. Real progress would be more people achieving stable happiness, fewer people suffering from anxiety and depression, stronger communities, deeper friendships, better understanding of how to live well. We've made incredible progress in understanding the physical world. We've made almost no progress in understanding how to be happy, and arguably, we've gotten worse at it. Epicurus made progress in understanding happiness 23 centuries ago, and we've mostly ignored his insights in favor of endless growth, consumption, and achievement. Maybe it's time to listen to what he figured out. That happiness doesn't scale with acquisition. That tranquility requires understanding more than circumstances. That friendship matters more than success. That simple pleasures fully enjoyed beat complicated pleasures half experienced. That death is nothing to fear. That gods are irrelevant or non-existent. That the good life is achievable right now for anyone willing to challenge their false beliefs and unnecessary desires. Part 15. The Garden. Today, building Epicurean community in the 21st century. So how do we actually live Epicurean philosophy today? How do we build gardens in the modern world? This isn't just theoretical. People are doing it, experimenting with different models, trying to recreate what Epicurus achieved. Let's explore what this looks like in practice. The most literal approach is intentional communities, groups of people choosing to live together, share resources, pursue philosophy collectively. These exist around the world, though few explicitly identify as Epicurean. Co-housing developments, where people have private spaces but share common facilities, meals, activities. Eco-villages focused on sustainable living and strong community. Housing cooperatives, where residents collectively own and manage property. These modern gardens face challenges Epicurus didn't. We're embedded in economies requiring money, embedded in legal systems requiring compliance, embedded in cultures that view communal living as weird or failed. You can't easily grow all your food. Zoning laws, agricultural knowledge, climate constraints. You can't easily achieve self-sufficiency. You need healthcare, utilities, internet access, transportation. You can't easily withdraw from politics. Your community still depends on infrastructure, law enforcement, courts. So modern Epicurean communities must be hybrid, partially self-sufficient, partially integrated with broader society. But the core principles remain applicable. Shared meals, emphasizing simple food and good conversation. Regular philosophical discussion, where members examine beliefs, challenge false ideas, support each other's pursuit of tranquility. frank speech, where people can be honest about struggles, confess anxieties, offer mutual correction. Shared resources, reducing individual need for money and possessions. Mutual aid networks, where members support each other through illness, hardship, crisis. Democratic decision-making, where everyone participates regardless of formal education or social status. These communities work when members truly share Epicurean values, when they're committed to simplicity over luxury, to tranquility over achievement, to community over individualism. They fail when members have conflicting visions of the good life, when some want more engagement with mainstream culture, while others want more separation, when practical demands overwhelm philosophical commitment. But communal living isn't the only way to live Epicurean principles. You can create a virtual garden, a network of friends committed to similar values who support each other remotely. Regular video calls for philosophical discussion. Shared online resources, readings, reflections, practices. Mutual accountability for living simply. Cultivating gratitude. Challenging false beliefs. Annual in-person gatherings for deeper connection. This lacks the daily interaction of communal living, but can work across distances, allowing people to maintain careers and family obligations while still having Epicurean community. Or you can create a local garden, a group of friends living separately but gathering regularly. Weekly dinners rotating between houses. Monthly philosophy meetings in someone's backyard. Shared resources like tools, vehicles, childcare, mutual support during illness or crisis. This maintains independence while creating genuine community, the rhythm of connection that friendship requires. The specifics matter less than the commitment to core practices. Philosophical discussion as regular practice, not occasional accident. Examining beliefs, identifying false ideas, supporting each other's understanding. Frank speech, where honesty is valued over politeness, where you can challenge each other without destroying relationships. Simple pleasures consciously cultivated and appreciated. Bread, water, conversation, sunset, friendship, valued as highly as luxury. Gratitude, practices making you aware of what you have rather than focused on what you lack. Mental exercises challenging unnecessary desires, questioning whether you really need what you think you need. Death contemplation, not morbidly, but practically, remembering mortality to clarify priorities and reduce fear. Friendship, prioritized over achievement. Relationships valued above success. Time with loved ones, protected from work demands. But here's what's hard about building gardens today. The dominant culture pulls you away from Epicurean values constantly. Advertising tells you happiness comes from buying things. Social media encourages comparison and envy. Career culture demands constant hustle and achievement. Consumer culture creates artificial needs and unlimited desires. The economy requires your participation through work and consumption. Family obligations often conflict with philosophical community. It's much harder to opt out than in Epicurus's time, when you could literally buy property outside Athens and live simply with friends. Today, you need money for healthcare, housing, food. You need to navigate complex legal and economic systems. You need to maintain some connection with mainstream culture, even if you want to minimize it. So modern Epicureanism requires compromise, working enough to meet basic needs while minimizing career ambition, consuming enough to function in society while rejecting consumerism, using technology selectively while avoiding its addictive and comparison-inducing aspects. Engaging politically on issues affecting your community while avoiding the disturbance of constant political involvement. This is harder than pure withdrawal, but more realistic for most people. The key is maintaining the core values even while compromising on external circumstances. You can work a regular job while living simply and saving money to reduce future need for income. You can participate in consumer economy while minimizing consumption and maximizing simple pleasures. You can use technology for connection while avoiding social media's comparison and envy. You can engage specific political issues affecting your community while avoiding the anxiety of constant news consumption and political drama. The Epicurean life today is more about psychology than circumstances, about cultivating the right mental attitudes, challenging false beliefs, distinguishing necessary from unnecessary desires, prioritizing friendship, accepting mortality, finding happiness in simplicity. You can do this while living apparently normal modern life, working, raising family, participating in society. The difference is internal. How you think about these activities, what you prioritize, what you're willing to sacrifice, what brings you satisfaction. Part 16. The final verdict. Epicurus's enduring gift. We've journeyed through the complete philosophy, the physics that liberates from supernatural fear, the ethics that democratizes happiness, the psychology that distinguishes real from false pleasures, the social thought that values friendship above all, the epistemology that grounds knowledge and experience, the therapeutic practices that bring tranquility. We've seen how it was attacked, suppressed, nearly destroyed. We've discovered how modern science vindicates its core insights. We've explored how it addresses contemporary crises of meaning, loneliness, anxiety. Now let's step back and ask what Epicurus's ultimate gift to humanity is. It's not any particular doctrine, not atomism, not hedonism, not even the specific practices he recommended. Those are valuable. Some are true. Some need modification. But the ultimate gift is something deeper. Epicurus showed that happiness is possible, is natural, is within reach for everyone regardless of circumstances. He showed that you don't need wealth, power, fame, luxury, divine favor, special knowledge, aristocratic birth to live well. You need understanding, friendship, simple pleasures, freedom from false beliefs. He showed that the good life isn't some distant ideal requiring a lifetime of preparation or otherworldly reward. It's achievable right now, today, if you understand how. This is profoundly democratic, profoundly humanistic, profoundly empowering. You're not dependent on external validation, on circumstances beyond your control, on winning some competition, on achieving some standard. You can opt out of the whole game and be happier for it. You can find wealth in poverty, freedom in simplicity, meaning in friendship, satisfaction in bread and water, joy in philosophical conversation, peace in accepting mortality. Epicurus showed that fear is usually baseless. Fear of gods, fear of death, fear of judgment, fear of missing out. When you examine these fears rationally, trace them to their sources, test them against evidence, most dissolve. What remains is manageable. He showed that desire is trainable. You're not stuck wanting what society tells you to want. You can distinguish natural from artificial desires, necessary from unnecessary, limited from unlimited. You can cultivate satisfaction with simple things, can find pleasure in what you already have rather than endlessly chasing more. He showed that friendship is essential, not nice to have, but fundamental to human flourishing. That investing in relationships matters more than investing in career or possessions. That community based on shared values and mutual support provides satisfaction that individual achievement never can. He showed that understanding liberates, that many problems we think are external circumstances are actually internal false beliefs, that changing your mind changes your experience. That philosophy isn't abstract theory, but practical therapy for living well. This is what makes Epicurus dangerous to power. Because if people believe him, if they actually internalize his teaching, they become ungovernable in a very specific way. Not rebellious or revolutionary. Epicurus counseled political withdrawal, but they stopped being motivated by what authorities use to control people. You can't motivate them with promises of wealth because they've learned that wealth beyond necessities doesn't bring happiness. You can't manipulate them with fear of divine punishment because they don't fear gods. You can't make them compete for status because they've opted out of status competition. You can't make them endlessly consume because they're satisfied with simple pleasures. You can't make them sacrifice well-being for career success because they've realized success doesn't bring tranquility. They're psychologically independent, mentally free, satisfied, with little needing almost nothing from systems of power. This is why Epicureanism had to be destroyed, not because it was wrong, though authorities claimed that, but because it was threatening a population of Epicureans wouldn't be good workers in exploitative economies, wouldn't be obedient subjects in authoritarian regimes, wouldn't be manipulable consumers in commercial culture, wouldn't be faithful adherents in controlling religions. They'd be free, genuinely, psychologically, profoundly free. And that freedom is still threatening. Today, maybe more than ever, our entire economic system depends on people believing they need more than they do. That happiness comes from consumption. That status matters. That success requires endless striving. If everyone became Epicurean, consumer capitalism would collapse not through revolution, but through mass opting out. People would work less, consume less care, less about status and achievement, invest more in friendship and simple pleasures. GDP would plummet. Stock markets would crash. Corporations would shrink. But people would probably be happier. This isn't going to happen. Most people won't become Epicurean. The pool of conventional success, of social comparison, of unlimited desire is too strong. But for those who do take Epicurus seriously, who actually try living his philosophy, the gift is liberation. Liberation from artificial needs, from false fears, from endless striving, from the tyranny of more liberation. To enjoy what you have, to appreciate simple pleasures, to invest in friendship, to pursue understanding, to live contentedly with mortality, to find meaning in the life itself, rather than in something beyond it. That's Epicurus, his gift. As relevant today as 23 centuries ago, may be more relevant because we're so far from it. So captured by exactly the false beliefs and unlimited desires he warned against. In an age of climate crisis, driven by overconsumption of loneliness epidemic, despite social media of anxiety and depression, despite material abundance of meaning, crisis, despite countless self-help books, maybe we need Epicurus more than ever, not as dogma to accept uncritically. We've seen his limitations, but his wisdom to consider seriously principles to test honestly a path worth exploring. A path worth exploring to see if it leads to genuine human flourishing. Because at the end of everything, That's what philosophy is for. Not abstract theory, not academic credentialing, not intellectual competition, but wisdom for living well, understanding that increases happiness, truth that liberates. Epicurus offered that. His philosophy works if you work it, test it, live it. See if simple pleasures deeply appreciated bring more satisfaction than complicated pleasures half experienced. See if friendship prioritized over achievement enriches your life. See if accepting mortality reduces anxiety. See if challenging false beliefs increases tranquility. See if living simply with basic needs met brings contentment that luxury never could. The proof is in the living. And that's Epicurus's final message. Don't just read about philosophy. Don't just discuss it abstractly. Live it. Practice it. Let it change how you see reality, how you evaluate desires, how you relate to others, how you face mortality. Let it be therapy, not theory. And if it works, if you find yourself happier, more tranquil, more satisfied, then you've received Epicurus's gift across 23 centuries. The gift of understanding that liberates, wisdom that heals, philosophy that actually helps. That's worth more than all the wealth, power, and fame in the world. Because those things can't give you what Epicurus offers: the good life, the tranquil mind, the satisfied heart, the philosopher's peace.